It was another Monday morning at Hendricks Global, one of the most prestigious corporate firms in downtown Manhattan, a place where glass walls, polished marble, and designer suits reflected not just success, but hierarchy. Elliot Crane, the CEO, strolled through the gleaming lobby with his usual entourage, his assistant, his PR manager, and the kind of self-assured smirk that came from knowing he owned everything in sight, or so he thought. Near the elevators, a janitor was quietly mopping the floor. His uniform was worn but spotless, his movements efficient, practiced. He was humming softly, a low melodic tune with a distinct Caribbean lilt. Elliot slowed down, eyebrows raised. "What's that sound?" he asked, half smiling. The janitor looked up politely. "Just a song from home, sir." His accent was thick, rich, West Indian, maybe Trinidadian. Elliot chuckled, glancing at his assistant. "A song from home," he repeated, mimicking the cadence under his breath. "You've got to love this city. Even the janitors think they're auditioning for Broadway." The assistant laughed awkwardly, while the janitor simply nodded, unfazed. "That works better with music," he said quietly. Elliot smirked. "Sure. Just keep the floors clean, yeah?" As he walked off, Elliot didn't notice the quiet look the janitor gave him. Not angry, not bitter. Just knowing. By lunchtime, Elliot had forgotten all about the encounter. He was too busy preparing for an upcoming investor meeting, one that would decide whether the company could secure funding for a massive expansion project. "These investors are old money," his CFO reminded him. "They already own half the property in this district." "Then they'll like me," Elliot said with a grin. "I speak their language." He didn't realize how ironic those words were. Because the next morning, when the investors arrived, escorted into the executive conference room, one of them wasn't wearing a tailored suit or carrying a briefcase. He was wearing the same calm expression, the same quiet confidence, and the same accent that Elliot had mocked in the lobby. It was the janitor. Only this time, he wasn't holding a mop. He was holding the deed to half the building. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and power, panoramic skyline views, espresso on silver trays, and the soft hum of business in motion. Elliot Crane sat at the head of the table, rehearsed smile in place, waiting for his investors to arrive. His assistant leaned over and whispered, "Sir, they're on their way up. The head of the group is a Mr. Samuel Desmond. He's not your typical investor." Elliot frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning he prefers to keep a low profile. But the man's portfolio is massive. Real estate, tech, renewable energy. He's apparently one of the silent owners of this building." Elliot straightened his tie. "Perfect. I'll charm him like I always do." The doors opened, and in walked a group of well-dressed professionals, followed by the last person Elliot ever expected to see. The janitor. He wasn't in uniform this time. He wore a tailored navy blue suit, subtle but refined. His hair neatly combed, his expression composed. "Good morning," he said with that same warm, melodic accent. "Mr. Crane, isn't it?" Elliot blinked, frozen. You, you're the janitor from downstairs." The man smiled calmly. "Ah, that's one of my jobs, yes." He extended his hand. "Samuel Desmond, co-owner of Desmond Holdings, and, as your assistant mentioned, one of the primary investors in this property." The room fell into stunned silence. Elliot's assistant nearly dropped her tablet. The CFO's mouth fell open. Samuel continued, taking a seat at the table like he'd been there his whole life. "I like to stay close to the ground, Mr. Crane. Sometimes the best way to understand how a building runs is to clean its floors." Elliot's throat went dry. I I had no idea." Samuel's eyes met his, kind but sharp. "I know you didn't. You didn't ask either." Elliot tried to recover, his usual charm faltering. "Mr. Desmond, I meant no disrespect." "Oh, I know," Samuel interrupted gently. "You didn't mean to. But meaning isn't the same as impact." The investors shifted in their seats, watching closely. Samuel folded his hands. "The funny thing about respect, Mr. Crane, is that it costs nothing to give, but everything when it's missing." Elliot looked down, face flushed. The humiliation burned hotter than any reprimand could. After a long pause, Samuel smiled faintly. "Now, shall we begin the meeting? I'm here to discuss the future of this building." And the people who keep it standing. Elliot nodded weakly. Of course. Yes, of course. But as Samuel began outlining his investment vision, focused on community jobs, worker equity, and ethics, Elliot sat in silence, realizing this man had built more than wealth. He had built character. And in a single moment, Elliot saw just how small power looked without it. For the rest of the meeting, Elliot Crane barely spoke. He sat rigid, forcing a polite smile while Samuel Desmond led the conversation with calm authority, explaining his philosophy of business as if he were lecturing without ever condescending. To build anything that lasts, Samuel said, you must start with people, not profits. Clean floors, clear minds, steady hearts. That's how you build stability. The other investors nodded, hanging on his every word. Even Elliot's board members, who once laughed at janitors and interns, now took notes like students. When the meeting adjourned, Samuel stood and extended a hand to Elliot. You run a fine company, Mr. Crane, but sometimes fine isn't enough. Greatness requires humility. Elliot swallowed hard and shook his hand. Mr. Desmond, I owe you an apology. Samuel smiled. For what? Elliot hesitated. For treating you like you didn't matter. Samuel nodded. That's the thing about dignity, Mr. Crane. It doesn't disappear when someone fails to see it. It just waits for them to open their eyes. With that, he left the room, his calm footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The rest of the day, Elliot couldn't focus. The laughter, the condescension, it all came back in fragments. The way he'd mocked Samuel's accent, the way he'd looked down on him as if his worth were tied to a uniform. He stayed late that night, alone in his office. Outside the glass walls, he could see the janitorial crew moving through the hallways, the same kind of people he'd ignored for years. He watched as they quietly swept floors, replaced trash bins, and wiped fingerprints off the glass he'd once thought made him important. Something inside him shifted. He got up, walked to the break room, and stopped one of the janitors, an older woman carrying a mop bucket. Hey, he said awkwardly. I just wanted to say thank you for what you do here, really. The woman blinked in surprise. Thank you, sir. It wasn't much, but for Elliot, it was the first honest thing he'd said all day. A few days later, Samuel called. I'm finalizing the renovation plans, Samuel said. We're building an employee center in the lobby, a space for all staff to rest and recharge. I'd like you to oversee it. Elliot frowned. Me? Samuel chuckled. Who better to learn what service really means than the man who forgot it? Elliot didn't argue. He just said, I'd be honored. And for the first time, he meant it. That week, he spent every day alongside the janitorial team, not to impress Samuel, but because he wanted to understand. He helped move furniture, cleaned storage rooms, even replaced light bulbs in the break area. At first, people thought he was joking, but as days passed, laughter turned into quiet respect. He wasn't the CEO looking down anymore. He was just Elliot, the man learning to stand on equal ground. That Friday, when Samuel returned to inspect the new employee lounge, he found Elliot wiping a window. Samuel grinned. Didn't think I'd see the day. Elliot smiled back. Turns out, clean glass gives you perspective. Samuel nodded. Now you're starting to sound like me. Both men laughed. In that moment, they weren't CEO and investor, just two men who understood what success really meant. Because real power doesn't come from owning the building. It comes from respecting everyone who keeps it standing. 2 months later, Hendrix Global looked and felt like a different company. The sterile marble lobby now had life, greenery, benches, and an open employee lounge at its center. Workers from every department, from executives to janitors, shared the same space for lunch and conversation. At first, the board had resisted the idea. A lounge in the lobby? For staff, one investor scoffed. It's not a factory, Elliot. But Elliot Crane didn't bend this time. It's not a factory, he said. It's a building filled with people, and I'm done pretending that some of them matter less than others. Even Samuel Desmond had smiled when he heard that. That morning, Samuel dropped by unannounced, dressed simply as always. No entourage, no pretense. He walked through the building quietly, greeting receptionists and janitors by name, stopping to chat with a delivery driver. When he reached Elliot's office, He found him sitting with a group of mid-level managers, listening, not talking. When the meeting ended, Samuel entered. "I see you've been keeping busy," he said with a knowing grin. Elliot smiled, "Trying to keep up with you." Samuel glanced around the office, the framed photo of the new staff lounge, the Employee of the Month board, featuring not just executives but maintenance workers too. "Looks like you've learned something." Elliot leaned back. "You taught me something better than business advice. You taught me balance." Samuel nodded. "And what does balance mean to you now?" Elliot paused before answering. "It means success isn't about what you build for yourself. It's about what you build for others." Samuel smiled, genuinely proud. "Then you've learned the only lesson that matters." That afternoon, Samuel asked Elliot to join him for lunch, not at one of the upscale restaurants Elliot used to frequent, but at a small Caribbean cafe tucked in a quiet corner of the city. They sat by the window, the smell of jerk chicken and fresh bread filling the air. "This was my first business," Samuel said. "Started it with my brother. We worked 16-hour days, mopping floors at night just to afford rent. People laughed at our accents, our clothes, our food, but we kept going. Not because we wanted to prove them wrong, but because we wanted to prove to ourselves that we were right." Elliot nodded, humbled. "You never forgot where you came from." Samuel looked at him gently. "And you finally remembered where you started." They both laughed softly. When they returned to the building, Samuel stopped by the lobby and turned to Elliot. "You know, when you first saw me mopping these floors, you saw a janitor." Elliot smiled faintly. "And I was blind." Samuel patted him on the shoulder. "Now you see. Don't lose that sight, Elliot. It's rarer than wealth." As Samuel walked out of the building, the janitorial team passed by, greeting him warmly, as they always did. Elliot stood by the window watching. He no longer saw uniforms or job titles, just people, each one carrying their own story, their own strength. And for the first time in his career, Elliot felt what power was truly meant for: lifting others. That evening, before leaving, he picked up a mop leaning against the wall. Not to make a statement, not for a photo op, but simply to help. The security guard raised an eyebrow. "Long day, sir?" Elliot smiled. "A good one." As he began to clean the same marble floor where he'd once laughed at a man's accent, the irony wasn't lost on him. It wasn't humiliation, it was healing. Because the real measure of a man isn't how high he stands, but how low he's willing to kneel to serve. And in that quiet moment, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, the CEO and the janitor finally stood as equals. 6 months later, Hendrix Global was being recognized as one of the most people-first companies in America, a phrase that would have once made Elliot Crane roll his eyes, but now made him proud. The building that had once symbolized cold corporate power was now alive with humanity. The janitors were no longer invisible. Maintenance crews had their own recognition wall, executives shared lunch breaks with staff, and Samuel Desmond's Employee Empowerment Initiative had spread across every branch of the company. The day of the award ceremony, Elliot stood in the newly built lobby lounge. Sunlight pouring through glass ceilings, workers and executives mingling freely. For the first time, he didn't feel like the owner of anything. He felt like part of something. Samuel Desmond arrived quietly, as always. No suit jacket, no entourage. Just that same calm dignity. He shook Elliot's hand. "You've done well," he said with a grin. "Almost makes me want to retire." Elliot laughed. "Don't you dare. The world still needs you to keep people like me in check." Samuel chuckled. "No, Elliot. The world needs people like you to remember what I told you. That power without compassion is just noise." Elliot nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You know, I think about that day a lot. When I laughed at you in the lobby. I thought I was the one who owned this place. But turns out I was just renting space in your world." Samuel smiled gently. "And now you own your actions instead. That's worth more." Later that afternoon, Elliot took the stage to accept the corporate award. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and the crowd of employees cheered as he stepped to the microphone. "I used to think success meant being the man at the top," he began. "But it doesn't. It means being the kind of person people trust to stand beside them." This building, these people, they're the foundation. I just finally learned to see it. The applause was warm, real, human. When it ended, Elliot looked down and saw Samuel standing at the back, clapping with quiet pride. Their eyes met for a moment, a silent acknowledgement that life had come full circle. That evening, long after the crowd had gone, Elliot walked through the now empty lobby. He paused by the mop closet, the same one Samuel had once used. It was spotless, but something about it grounded him. He reached inside and pulled out a broom, sweeping quietly for a few minutes, the soft rhythm echoing across the marble floor. He smiled to himself. Perspective, he murmured, the best tool in the building. Outside, the city glowed, bright, bustling, alive, and somewhere in the distance, Samuel's words echoed in his mind. Respect costs nothing, but it pays back more than any deal ever will. Elliot leaned the broom against the wall and took one last look at his reflection in the glass. He didn't see a CEO. He didn't see a janitor. He just saw a man who finally understood what it meant to lead. Because true power doesn't shine from above. It rises from below, with the people who build, clean, and hold everything together. And this time, Elliot Crane would never forget that.